Prince William expected a procedural ruling. What he received instead struck directly at the most painful part of his private history. Inside a sealed court record sat a finding that transformed an obscure dispute over archived material into something deeply personal. Private files connected to Diana had been withheld from the family archive, and Meghan was identified within this fictional scenario as the person who had retained them. William did not argue, he simply stopped moving. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William stared at the ruling as the words settled over him. The proceeding had begun as a fictional dispute over ownership and custody of private correspondence, recorded recollections, photographs, and handwritten notes connected to Diana. A restricted family archive meant a protected collection where sensitive personal records were preserved under controlled access rather than kept freely in private hands. That distinction mattered deeply to the prince because these were not ordinary historical papers. They contained fragments of his mother's private life, memories he believed had been placed beyond the reach of another family conflict. The judge's fictional ruling made the central finding painfully clear. A collection of Diana-related files had remained outside approved archival custody, and Meghan had retained access to part of that material after instructions had been issued for its surrender. William read the crucial paragraph once, then again. His solicitor remained silent as the future king slowly lowered the page and whispered that those records had never been meant to become leverage between people already divided by years of bitterness. Catherine watched him carefully. She had seen William angry before, but this was different. The princess understood that his first reaction was not rage. It was grief. He could accept arguments about titles, interviews, money, even public criticism, but Diana occupied another emotional territory entirely. William had spent years believing that whatever remained of his mother's most private thoughts had at least been protected from the battles consuming the living. Then, another detail changed everything. William reached the court schedule and discovered a reference to an additional sealed inventory, an official list identifying protected material that had not appeared during the first archive review. Several entries remained undisclosed. One description stopped him cold, a privately dictated recollection connected to Diana's final years. He recognized it immediately as something he had believed lost decades earlier. William turned another page, expecting another file number. Instead, he found Harry's name. And once William realized his brother may have known those files existed, grief began turning into something far more dangerous. For William and Harry, Diana was never merely a public figure preserved in photographs and documentaries. She was their mother, and the smallest private details carried an emotional weight outsiders could never fully understand. That was why the discovery cut so deeply. The argument was no longer about paperwork. It was about who had the right to protect her memory, and whether one brother had allowed that memory to become entangled in a conflict neither of them could control. William carried that question into the call with restraint. For years, the prince had treated letters, recordings, and personal notes connected to Diana as family possessions in the emotional sense, even when lawyers could debate ownership. Harry carried the same grief, but he believed silence could distort their mother's story, just as publicity could exploit it. Both brothers believed they were defending her, yet each feared the other had crossed a line. Harry answered without an aide, advisor, or lawyer beside him. William waited through the seconds, then asked the question he had been holding back. "Did you know she still had them?" The silence that followed felt worse than a denial. Harry finally said he knew some material had remained outside the family archive, a protected collection where sensitive records were stored under controlled access, but he believed the copies had been obtained lawfully and that nothing uniquely private had been kept from William. William felt the hurt sharpen. Harry insisted that understanding Diana's experiences was not the same as turning her into ammunition, and he said Meghan had been given access during an earlier effort to understand what his mother had endured inside royal life. The future king pushed back. Whatever the intention, he said, their mother's private thoughts could not become another weapon in a family conflict already filled with accusations and mistrust. Harry repeated that he had never believed anything irreplaceable was being concealed. Then the call changed direction. William had been shown a handwritten approval connected to the original access request, and the document appeared to authorize removal of selected material. Yet the signature belonged to an official whose authority had already expired when the files were released. Harry sounded unsettled when he heard that detail. He had assumed the permission was valid. William realized his brother might have known the files existed without knowing how fragile the authorization was. The trail now pointed backward. Months before the archive dispute exploded, a private meeting had taken place at Frogmore Cottage, and that meeting had quietly set everything in motion. To understand how Diana's private papers ever reached this point, William would have to return to the meeting everyone had tried to forget. Months before lawyers became involved, there had been no courtroom, no ruling, and no public scandal. There had only been a small sitting room, 4 people, and a request that seemed personal enough to avoid formal scrutiny. Looking back, however, that meeting became the moment everything changed. What was offered as temporary access to historical material created a chain of possession nobody fully controlled, and one decision made that afternoon eventually placed Diana's private legacy at the center of a family crisis. Harry entered that meeting with a deeply personal purpose. He wanted temporary access to selected records connected to Diana so he could understand choices made around his mother during her final years. Meghan supported him, insisting the request was about family history rather than publication. A retired archive liaison agreed to supervise the review. An archive liaison, in simple terms, is someone trusted to manage access to protected historical records and make sure sensitive material is handled correctly. The arrangement seemed narrow. It would not stay that way. Meghan studied the files carefully while Harry moved between letters, copied notes, and recorded recollections. The liaison allowed handwritten notes because the original restrictions did not clearly forbid them. Then came the moment everyone would later remember. Meghan asked whether several folders could remain overnight, so Harry could finish reading them privately. The request sounded temporary. The liaison hesitated, then agreed. Morning came. The folders did not. William knew nothing about that conversation at the time. When he later discovered the meeting had taken place without his knowledge, the hurt landed harder than the procedural breach itself. The prince felt decisions about their mother's private history had been made around him instead of with him. Harry had been in the room. Meghan had made the request. William had not even been told access was being discussed. Weeks later, the unease deepened. Archive staff discovered that an inventory sheet had been changed to say the folders were returned to family custody. An inventory sheet is the official record used to track where protected material is supposed to be. That phrase created dangerous ambiguity, because it did not identify who physically held the documents. Harry believed the wording meant everything remained within legitimate family control. William saw something else, a gap large enough for accountability to disappear. Catherine then uncovered an older email preserved in William's office records. The message clearly requested that no Diana-related material leave supervised archival control. She showed it to the prince, and his reaction hardened. The Frogmore arrangement had not merely developed without his knowledge. It had directly contradicted instructions already issued in his name. William finally understood how the files had left controlled custody. He still did not understand why Meghan had kept them after repeated requests for their return. That answer would come only when William and Meghan finally entered the same room and stopped speaking through lawyers. There were no cameras, no palace statement, and no carefully prepared line capable of softening what happened next. William entered the private meeting, carrying a single folder containing the court's findings. Meghan arrived, knowing why she had been asked to come. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then William placed the folder between them and asked the question that had been consuming him since the ruling. Why had Diana's private material remained in her possession? William held Meghan's gaze as the silence tightened between them. Harry was absent. The prince had insisted on hearing the answer without his brother translating, defending, or interrupting. Before the meeting, Catherine had urged him to seek clarity rather than revenge, because whatever emerged would reach Harry. Her warning mattered. This was not merely a legal quarrel anymore. It threatened the fragile remains of a family divided by years of distrust. Meghan answered carefully. She said some of the papers appeared directly connected to Harry's childhood and to questions he had carried for years, and she believed surrendering everything before a review could bury information he had a right to understand. William pushed back. He asked why repeated archive requests had been ignored. An archive request, he knew, was a formal demand that material be returned to controlled custody. To him, ignoring those requests turned uncertainty into secrecy. William's restraint finally cracked. He told Meghan that Diana's most vulnerable moments belonged neither to palace strategy nor to personal storytelling. She did not retreat. Meghan replied that silence had also been used against Diana, and that protecting uncomfortable truth could sometimes require resisting institutions that preferred control. The clash was no longer about folders. It was about two competing ideas of loyalty, one built around privacy, the other around disclosure. Then Meghan changed the direction of the meeting. She revealed, through the documented custody record she had brought with her, that she had not kept every item. Several pieces had been transferred into protected legal storage because she feared they could disappear if surrendered without a documented chain of custody. That term meant a written record showing who handled material, when they received it, and where it went next. Meghan slid a receipt across the table. William read the description once and went still. DPW, personal recollection. An independent solicitor was holding the sealed envelope. The initials were unmistakable. William had entered the room demanding an explanation from Meghan. He left facing a larger question. Who possessed the authority to recover, protect, and control Diana's archive? For the first time, William understood that confronting Meghan was only the beginning. The real decision now belonged to whoever controlled the legal fate of the files. Behind the emotional confrontation stood a colder question, one capable of determining everything that followed. Who legally controlled the material? William's grief could not decide ownership. Meghan's explanation could not erase the ruling. Harry's connection to his mother could not automatically override archive restrictions. The answer rested with trustees, executors, and custodians, whose decisions suddenly carried enormous personal consequences. And one of them was about to make William confront a truth he did not expect. William entered the next discussion, believing his position was simple: recover everything connected to Diana and return it to protected custody. Yet the legal structure was more complicated. The fictional archive trust was a private custodial arrangement created to preserve sensitive family records while preventing unauthorized copying, transfer, or publication. Control did not belong to one person. Appointed trustees shared authority with a designated family representative, meaning the prince could influence access but could not simply demand possession of every disputed item. Charles read the court summary alone before speaking to his son. The king moved slowly through the pages until he reached the inventory describing Diana's private recollections. Then he removed his glasses, placed them beside the document, and said nothing. William watched his father carefully. The silence carried history. Charles understood that these papers were not merely evidence in a dispute. They touched wounds that had shaped both of his sons for decades. William asked for immediate recovery of every original file. Charles hesitated. He did not defend Meghan, nor did he challenge the ruling. Instead, the monarch warned that another aggressive move could push Harry further away and destroy what little remained between the brothers. William heard caution. He also heard fear. For the first time, he realized his father was weighing not only legal control, but the survival of the family itself. Then the trustees made their decision. They voted to demand the return of all original material, while allowing authenticated copies of records clearly connected to Harry's childhood. Authenticated copies meant verified reproductions, confirmed as genuine, without surrendering ownership of the originals. The compromise protected the archive, while acknowledging that Diana's younger son had a personal claim to parts of his own history. But one item remained outside the immediate order. The sealed envelope marked DPW, Personal Recollection, could not yet be transferred because nobody knew whether it legally belonged to Diana's archive, to Harry, or to privileged material created later from her records. William accepted the ruling without satisfaction. Then Meghan received the retrieval order. Her response changed everything again. The legal boundary had finally been drawn, but Meghan's response would determine whether the family stepped back from the edge or moved closer to it. The first consequences did not arrive with shouting. They arrived in boxes. Catalogued, sealed, numbered, and accompanied by lawyers, the disputed files began moving back into protected custody. For William, the return should have felt like victory. Instead, watching his mother's papers reduced to legal inventory only deepened the sadness. Across the divide, Harry finally saw the dispute in physical form and realized that what had once seemed like a disagreement about access had become a judgment about trust. Harry stood beside the sealed containers as legal representatives prepared them for transfer. Meghan had complied with the principal retrieval order, authorizing the return of the original folders, notebooks, copied correspondence, and photographs covered by the fictional ruling. A retrieval order was simply the formal instruction requiring disputed material to be handed back into approved custody. No titles were removed, no punishment was announced. Instead, the palace tightened archive rules so future access would require authorization from two responsible parties, not one. Harry reached toward one box and rested his hand against it for a moment, before pulling away. The gesture exposed what words had not. These were pieces of Diana's life. But now they were also evidence in a conflict with William. The younger brother looked shaken, because the dispute had moved beyond legal arguments. Trust itself had been catalogued, numbered, and damaged. Meghan watched him carefully. She told Harry that she had believed the material needed protection because important records could disappear once returned behind institutional doors. He did not accuse her of bad intentions. Instead, he said intention no longer changed how William experienced what happened. His brother believed their mother's privacy had been crossed, and that wound could not be erased simply by explaining why the files had been kept. Then one unresolved item returned to the center of everything. Meghan confirmed through her solicitor's documented custody record that she had never opened the envelope marked DPW, Personal Recollection. The lawyer had warned that opening it could violate privilege, meaning legal protections might restrict who could inspect confidential material and under what circumstances. For once, restraint had preserved rather than complicated the evidence. William received the next court direction in silence. The decision gave neither brother control alone. He and Harry would have to jointly choose whether the envelope was opened, archived permanently without being read, or destroyed under supervision. Neither could act without the other. That condition changed the emotional balance instantly. Suddenly, the dispute that had divided them created one decision they could make only together. And when William learned that the final envelope could not move without Harry beside him, the battle over Diana finally became a conversation between her sons. For all the lawyers, judges, advisors, and archive officials drawn into the dispute, the decisive moment required none of them. William and Harry sat alone with the sealed envelope between them. No wives, no aides, no courtiers, no cameras. Just two sons facing an object carrying their mother's initials and decades of unresolved grief. For the first time since the court ruling, neither man was arguing over Meghan. They were deciding what Diana's memory demanded from them. William said nothing when the solicitor left the room. Before departing, the lawyer had explained one condition clearly. Neither brother could remove, reproduce, or authorize access to the envelope without the other's written consent. Written consent meant a signed agreement proving that both men approved the same action. That mattered because it stripped away the possibility of either side controlling Diana's private material alone. For once, neither brother held the advantage. Harry looked at the envelope but did not reach for it. He told William that whatever decision they made had to bind them equally. No selective quotations, no future memoir excerpt. No palace briefing using their mother's words as protection. The prince agreed. That simple agreement carried more weight than either expected, because it created something the family had lacked for years. One rule: neither brother could bend against the other. William finally admitted what the court ruling had done to him. Seeing Meghan's name connected to the retained files had made him feel that he had failed to protect something sacred. Harry listened, then answered with his own fear. He had spent years believing too much of Diana's truth had been sealed away, controlled by institutions, and buried behind silence. One brother feared exposure. The other feared erasure. Both suddenly understood that the same grief had pushed them in opposite directions. Harry did not excuse what happened next. He acknowledged that allowing material to remain outside authorized custody had created the appearance of secrecy, whatever the original intention. He told William he should have challenged the arrangement earlier rather than convincing himself the problem would disappear. The admission did not repair everything, but it changed the temperature between them. Then came the decision. William and Harry chose not to open the envelope. Instead, both signed instructions returning it sealed to permanent archival custody, with a fixed release date placed well beyond their own lifetimes. Permanent archival custody meant protected long-term storage under formal restrictions, removing the material from either brother's personal control. William made one concession in return. Harry would receive certified copies of childhood records clearly belonging to his personal history. The argument had produced no winner, it had produced a boundary. By the next morning, the family dispute had escaped the legal chamber, and one photograph outside Buckingham Palace came to define how the public understood it. By sunrise, the story was no longer confined to private rooms. Broadcasters debated inheritance, privacy, loyalty, and Diana's continuing hold over the monarchy. Yet amid the noise, one public moment captured the crisis more powerfully than any headline. Outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathered beneath the gates, while newspapers displayed the same image: William and Harry, leaving the legal meeting separately, but carrying no papers, making no statements, and refusing to attack each other. William saw the coverage early and felt the old anger return in a different form. The palace had confirmed only that disputed archival material had been returned, and that new safeguards were now in place. Those safeguards meant stricter rules controlling who could access sensitive family records and under what conditions. Officials refused to reproduce private details from the fictional court file, but that restraint did not stop the argument. Some commentators defended privacy. Others insisted Diana's historical importance gave the public a claim to know more. Catherine watched William move from headline to headline and noticed what disturbed him most. Newspapers were framing the dispute as a contest over who owned Diana. The princess reminded him that the sealed envelope had not been opened, quoted, or turned into a weapon. That decision mattered more than controlling a single morning's coverage. William knew she was right, but seeing his mother's memory reduced to opposing camps still felt like another kind of loss. Harry heard a broadcaster describe the agreement as the brothers' first meaningful act of cooperation in years. He stayed quiet as the analysis continued, then visibly softened when the discussion shifted away from accusation and toward restraint. For the first time since the ruling, the younger brother was not being asked which side had won. He was being asked what both sons had chosen not to do. Then one fictional front page captured the mood. Diana files returned. Brothers seal final record together. Beneath it, a photograph showed Buckingham Palace gates lined with flowers and handwritten notes calling for privacy, dignity, and peace. Meghan responded through a brief written statement acknowledging the court-directed return and accepting the new archival safeguards. She did not challenge William and Harry's decision to keep the final envelope sealed. The public argument began to cool, but William still faced one private decision. He had protected the files. Now he had to decide whether the betrayal would define every relationship that remained inside the wounded family circle after everything changed. The files were finally protected, but William's true verdict would not be written by a judge. It would be revealed by what he chose to do after the courtroom had fallen silent. The court ruling began as a devastating discovery for William. but it ended by forcing every person involved to confront a harder truth. Diana's memory could not survive as a weapon passed between competing sides of the family. Protecting her meant setting boundaries, admitting mistakes, and refusing to turn every private wound into public ammunition. By the time the final files returned to secure custody, William's anger had changed. It had become something quieter, heavier, and ultimately more decisive. William entered the protected archive after every original item covered by the fictional court order had been returned. The inventory had been jointly verified, meaning each document was checked against the official record, so no known file remained unaccounted for. New rules now required two-person approval before highly personal family material could be accessed. That change mattered because no single household, advisor, or relative could again control Diana's sensitive records without another authorized person agreeing. William stopped beside the sealed container carrying his mother's reference number. He could have asked for another inspection. He did not. The prince simply looked toward the archivist and said, "Keep it safe." Those 3 words carried everything the court could never resolve: grief, anger, responsibility, and the acceptance that protecting Diana did not require possessing every piece of her. Harry met his brother privately later. No dramatic embrace followed. William told him trust would have to be rebuilt through actions, not promises, and Harry accepted that without argument. The younger brother acknowledged his part in allowing uncertain custody to continue. Meghan, meanwhile, accepted the legal boundary placed around the archive. She lost independent access to Diana-related material, but William refused to turn that restriction into endless punishment. The final envelope settled the deeper question. William and Harry had chosen to leave it unopened, permanently protected until a future release date beyond their lifetimes. Neither brother possessed Diana's private recollection. Neither could quote it, publish it, or use it against the other. Their mother had finally stopped being territory in a battle over loyalty. William had begun this crisis devastated because he believed Diana's privacy had been violated. He ended it understanding that restraint could protect her more powerfully than anger ever could. Harry accepted responsibility. Meghan accepted limits. The monarchy accepted stricter safeguards. The court had returned the files, but the deeper victory was more personal. Diana's memory had finally been removed from the battlefield, leaving her sons with grief they could share, instead of evidence they could use against one another. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.